Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, Libration Nation. I have to tell you first up, I have been singing Welcome to New York over in my head while prepping this podcast because that's what it feels like. It's so fun and it's so New York. Our book this week is Garlic and Sapphires, The Secret Life of a Critic in Disguise, a witty and revealing memoir by renowned legendary food critic Ruth Reichl. It's about her experience being the New York Times food critic. She went under disguise to avoid preferential treatment and to uncover the truth about New York's dining scene. Blending memoir, food writing, and restaurant reviews, this book offers delicious behind-the-scenes stories, vivid character sketches, and reflections on identity, privilege, and the power of perception, all served under the iconic Manhattan skyline. The amazing person who came to me with this book is Mandy Naglich, an author, journalist, and certified taster. She travels the world to report stories on food and drink culture for a variety of outlets, as well as her own personal platform, Drinks with Mandy. Her award-winning book, How to Taste, takes readers on a journey into their senses and introduces them to the quirky characters in the world of professional tasting along the way. We enjoyed Cosmo's, the most New York Manhattan drink you can imagine. And as Mandy said, they're coming back. So enjoy one with us tonight. Mandy is amazing and brought so much expertise to the conversation. I was so pleased to get to know her, and I know you will be as well. Last but not least, if you're enjoying Drinks in the Library and you want to give me some support, please head over to wherever you get your podcasts and make sure to give us a subscribe, 5-star review, all that good stuff. All right, let's get to it. There we go. All right, Mandy, so cool to meet you today. And you brought to me this really wonderful book by Ruth Reichl, Garlic and Sapphires. So I always start off, first of all, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to talk about this book. It's like one of those ones that I revisit every couple years, and I just love it more every time.
Okay, and so that brings me to my first question is, who were you the first time that you read it?
Oh, good question. I was just like kind of getting into being a journalist. So I was just moving to New York and I wanted to like soak in everything about New York. And she was the longtime New York Times food critic. So I first read her columns and then I was like, oh, I should read this book that she put together about her time as the New York Times food critic. And now I've been in New York for more than a decade, which is crazy. Yeah. You obviously, your relationship to the city, the relationship to kind of food critics, and now me being more in the journalism food space, like the way that I think about that job is totally different than the first time I read it.
Yeah. So when you first read it, you had just moved to New York. Did it give you so tell us about some of the New York vibes then in the book that kind of like set the tone for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, a little synopsis, I guess, of the book is it's about Ruth, and she is moving from LA to New York to be the food critic. And she wears all these disguises because it's a very big deal, especially pre-internet when this book was written, not pre-internet, I guess, but pre-New York Times being on the internet.
Right.
It was a really big deal to be reviewed in the New York Times. It was like a make or break for your business. It still is in some ways, but she used to literally like wear disguises out. So the chapters go by restaurant and like what disguise she was wearing. So it kind of takes you through the big steakhouses of New York, which is such a different environment that I'm used to, that I am in, you know, these really expensive restaurants and these tiny little Asian noodle shops that she loves. And it kind of takes you through different scenes and neighborhoods of the city, all from her perspective as a critic and kind of her becoming these different disguises. So I thought it was just such an interesting way to write about food. And it is a book that I constantly recommend to people.
Okay. So what's like one of your favorite restaurants that she visits then?
Good question. She does this really innovative thing when she's reviewing Le Cirque, which was a really, really popular, really expensive, hard to get table back then. And she actually writes two separate reviews. One when she was in disguise and she's like treated terribly and she sits in the corner by the kitchen. And one when she walks in as the critic and says, like, this reservation's for me. And the maitre d' literally says to her, the King of Spain is waiting for his table, but I'll take you to yours now. And the King of Spain was literally at the restaurant.
Oh my gosh.
And so she writes them side by side and just says, like, it's hard. This is why I do this disguise thing. You can't review a restaurant when you're, being treated this way and totally swayed. And I think that was just really innovative to give that insight to how restaurant reviews can be swayed back then. And no one had really talked about that before her. So that's one that I go back to and I really think like changed the scape of food criticism.
Okay. So for someone like me who doesn't know much about food criticism, I mean, what is that world like? Like, what's something like you would love for people to know about that world, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it has changed so much, right? Like now everyone on Yelp is a food critic and things like that, or Google Maps more than Yelp, I guess now.
Yeah.
But I think something that people don't realize is it is like a really intense job that they take very seriously. Like she goes to each restaurant that she reviews 8 times. Like I said, in disguise with different people, orders everything on the menu, is like really putting in the work. It seems like this very glamorous job. I still think it's probably quite glamorous, but I think, it's really like putting in work and researching just like anything else, any other job. If you were a scientist, if you were reporting on politics, like really making sure you have your facts right, being serious about it, even though something like going out to eat seems so fun and kind of light and airy. She takes it very seriously, and so did her predecessors and the people after her. So I think that you really get that insight when she's talking about going to these restaurants, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, having to take her kid, having to take her friends, like being forced to eat menus at places that she doesn't think are very good, but she has to go back to make sure it actually is not good.
Have you read other books from her?
Yes, I'm trying to think of, is her other one called Save Me the Plums?
Yeah.
So that's a little more essay-y, it leans more, she kind of becomes quite like a more recipe-focused home cooking writer after she's a restaurant reviewer, and that goes a little bit more into that. But I think her writing's great. I actually read her Substack as well.
Cool.
Yeah, she really, the way she talks about food and kind of intertwines emotion and food without it feeling like sappy. Sometimes it feels so forced to me when people are like, talking about their childhood memories when they're eating a dish or something. But she really does it in a way that feels approachable and not like that.
Yeah.
Trying to pull at your heartstrings.
Okay, good. And like also thinking about that and thinking about someone who's wanting to read this book, like what would you say is the vibe of that you get it? What does it feel like when you're reading it?
I mean, it's nonfiction, but it's definitely like adventurous and it has a story behind it, right? It's narrative nonfiction, I guess would be the category.
Yeah.
It's not essays. It's not, disconnected. You have to read the book the whole way through to really get the vibe. And then, yeah, she's very, I guess, jubilant about things. She's excited. She has a lot of enthusiasm. Even when things are going wrong, she has a perspective that's like quite enthusiastic and excited, which I think in a way that she is also quite technical. It comes across really nicely balanced, which is something that like I totally take inspiration from her. Being perfectly fact on, like being technical without being boring or like preachy.
Yeah. I want to ask, how did you get into the food and drink world? Like, did you know it as a child this was for you?
Definitely not. I actually used to be I grew up a pretty picky eater, a lot of chicken fingers. But in college, I worked at a restaurant that was very adventurous. It was game focused. Obviously, you have to eat the whole menu when you're working at a restaurant. So like kangaroo nachos, rattlesnake, all kinds of like crazy meats. And I just had realized that I was limiting myself so much. I just had never been exposed to different foods. And so I definitely got very excited about trying new things and going to restaurants and seeing all the creativity that chefs could do. I really hadn't opened my eyes to that until I worked at that restaurant.
And then you have several like certifications too, right? So what's that like?
Yeah, so I was in marketing and audience development at WNYC, which is our NPR station here in New York, when I won the National Homebrew Competition in 2016. 5,000 people enter their homemade beer, and my Saison won the Belgian category. So that started my adventures in proving my expertise at beer, I suppose you could say.
Okay.
So yeah, it was really unexpected. I wasn't in a homebrew club. There aren't many women who do it. So I got some attention from that. I actually got a column on a website called VinePair about home brewing. And from there went on my journey to become an advanced cicerone, which I was one of the first 100 in the country. It's a beer certification like being a somm. So you have to be able to blind identify 160 different styles of beer, write pairing essays, taste different elements, and know which chemical compound they are, things like that. So it's a lot of studying. But then I got obsessed. So now I'm a certified taster. I have my W set in wine up to level 2. I have my W set in spirits and sake, cheese tasting certification from the Cheese Academy. I really got obsessed with this idea that you can really know how to taste everything in a certain category. So that's where that long list of crazy certifications comes from.
And okay, how do you practice? How do you prepare for something like that? I'm very curious. I mean, I've seen sommeliers documentaries before, but what was that like for you, I guess?
Yeah, the thing that's amazing about tasting and just our senses of taste and smell they are so affected by practice. You can literally practice for 2 weeks, and in your brain scan, they can see your olfactory bulb, which is where we process smells in our brain, literally grow in 2 weeks. So it's basically like flashcards, the way you would, if you were practicing a language or something, go through your flashcards, doing them with different scents and tastes, doing them blind. I would just smell things like dark malt and say out loud, like black malt, crystal malt. And you kind of just say, just to get them in your brain, just like a flashcard. And just like those flashcards, you can also lose it just as quickly. It's amazing to me how when I'm I'm going to be judging or doing a certification, I really do practice for a couple weeks ahead of time. And then if you don't do that for a while, someone will put something in front of me and I'll be like, oh, is that Damasceno? And I can't tell. And it's 2 weeks ago, I immediately know,
Okay.
So it's amazing how, practice does make perfect. And it really is just sitting there sniffing vials and tasting things and spitting them out and tasting them again.
I mean, it's amazing. It really is. Yeah. All of that goes into it. And then also I was curious about your writing and, how do you spend your days?
I spend my days so many different ways. I do a lot of TV presenting now, which is really wonderful, sharing kind of what's trending and happening in the world of spirits, pairings, wines. I just had a little mini documentary with Business Insider come out today, actually, about the pub scene in London, which is wonderful. But I also do a lot of travel writing. I'm working on a piece about the best bars in Oslo right now. So spending my days is thinking about the people I want to highlight, the things that I think are cool that are happening, and what's the best format to share that with people. I think there's so much innovation going on, so many things. It doesn't have to be alcohol, so many great things that make your life better with what you eat and drink, and what's the best way to reach people with that.
Okay. Yeah.
So every day is different.
Yeah, different media tools and all that as well. I asked you if you wanted to pick our drink tonight. So do you want to share with us what our drink is?
Yes. So like I said, this book is super New York. It's going through all different, whether it's a dessert restaurant, whether, like I said, little tiny noodle shops. So I wanted to do something that I think is available in a ton of New York restaurants, and it's totally making a comeback, and that is the Cosmopolitan.
Yes.
So I actually have all my little ingredients here. Should we chat through making one?
I would love that.
Okay. So I do mine a little bit differently because I love pomegranate juice in my Cosmos.
Okay.
That's not classic.
Okay.
But so instead of doing all cranberry, I do a 1/2 ounce of pomegranate.
Okay.
If you can find the fresh pomegranate, but it's often kind of hard to find. Then a 1/2 ounce of cranberry juice. The classic Cosmo that got famous with Sex and the City and stuff, they say it has to be Ocean Spray. I'm using Whole Foods generic brand. Even my taster palette can't taste that big of a difference.
Okay.
Too, so. I guess some people set out rules just to have something to say. And then a half ounce of lime. So it's just equal parts lime, pomegranate, cranberry. And then we're going to do 1 ounce of Cointreau. So a triple sec. Do you know it's like the orange liqueur? Actually, a classic Cosmo garnish is an orange, not a lime. I know we often see lime because it has the fresh lime juice, but the essence of orange goes a little bit better.
Okay.
And then depending on what you're in the mood for vodka-wise, it can be 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces of vodka. I tend toward 1.5 ounces. Okay. We're not being too crazy. It's a Monday night when we're recording.
Yeah.
So. And this is actually really cool. This is a brand new vodka that came out. It's called Hard Cut vodka.
Hard Cut. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and it's like it's with a celebrity. There's a lot of celebrity brands coming out, but I actually think it's really great. It's filtered and it has a little bit of the flavor from the wheat left over instead of being totally neutral. So,
okay.
Are you ready to hear a little shake?
I am so ready.
All right, let's go. All right, we had to really go because my favorite part on the Cosmo, I love when you get the little like ice Krispies on top.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Where you don't over filter it. I'm going to have to grab a filter actually. All right, we're back. I have my strainer. So yeah, this is like a Hawthorne strainer. Some people will do a strainer and then they'll do like another basket under it to catch those ice crunches.
Okay.
I love the little ice flakes. I feel like that's the best.
Yeah.
All right, there you go. You can hear the ice going. And now you all listening can't see it, but it's like this really pretty color because
beautiful.
Of the pomegranate.
It's beautiful. I love a Cosmo as well. So cheers.
Cheers. Yes. To our New York book, New York drink. Cosmos are back, man.
Yes. I'm so, like you said, I was, Cosmos. I just think about Sex and the City and watching that when I was was too young to be watching it.
That's another thing that totally changes though as you like come back for your rewatch. I feel like your relationship to the content just changes so much, which is
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit more about the book in New York. And I mean, she's moving from LA to New York. Like, how is that affecting her and the changes between the two cities, I'm guessing?
Yeah, definitely. She focuses more in the book about the differences between the two newspapers coming from the LA Times to the New York Times. Obviously, the New York Times is such an institution. Doesn't matter where you're coming from. People have kind of put their own things on the New York Times. And she talks a lot about what it's like to exist within that office, exist with that title, how like celebrities would call and ask for the restaurant critic and like ask for restaurant recommendations and stuff like that. So just what a different, she's like, I had the same job. She was the food critic at the LA Times, but how different it was coming to the New York Times and how you're kind of on this upper echelon that there's almost nothing like it. I mean, compared to the New York Times restaurant critic, I guess. I was like trying to think if there's a food show or something, but we love Guy Fieri, but Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives does not have the same prestige or reach that the New York Times restaurant critic has. So
yeah, what was that experience like for her? I mean, I guess she moved there with her husband, and then now being in New York, it's so much more glamorous. I mean, not that LA is not glamorous, but it's just it's different, like you were saying.
Yeah, and I think one of the things she focuses on, which I think a lot of New York versus LA people will focus on, is just the ease of getting around. You can go from dinner to a different restaurant to desserts to a nightcap if you wanted. LA, obviously, you're driving everywhere, and it really limits the breadth and depth you can have of experiencing restaurants in the city. You're pretty much going to go to one restaurant, and if you're lucky and there's a bar next door, maybe you'll go, but everyone's driving home as well, so you're probably not going to have your nightcap, where we're very lucky here in New York that we can just take the subway home and not have to, you can have a glass of champagne at night before you go to bed, and you're just walking home or taking a subway or a taxi. So she talks about that, just the variety and feeling so much part of a community. But a lot of what she focuses on is these really interesting, she ends up working with like a Broadway costumer to make these disguises, and how like in character she gets, and how much being in character like that kind of takes off the pressure from her. It takes her, she feels less like she has to perform and more like she can just experience it by like sliding into this character. And she even says sometimes like at the ends of the chapters, you got to read the review that she wrote of the restaurant. And she'll say like, I feel like I wrote this review in the voice of Brenda, who was the character when she was. So I think that's so interesting. And honestly, that's why I picked a Cosmo for this too. Because I do feel like, when you order a silly drink out and you're just like, I'm kind of like a different person. You're like, whatever, girls, we're getting Cosmos. Like, you become Cosmo girl for the night. You're not trying too hard to impress anyone. You're not like, oh, let me get a super expensive wine. Yeah. I do feel like that can set the tone if you're like, I'm getting into this character for what your dining experience or whatever, eating out, going to shows. We all kind of put on our little, this is my fancy night out, or this is what, dive bar, or cooking night. We kind of slide in and out of those things. And I think she really explains it well in the book. And she has like one character that's an older lady, one that's like a hippie, one that, so it's fun to hear how she comes up with these personas and then imagine going to restaurants dressed up as characters. She's like wearing a wig in all of them. It's crazy to me.
Yeah. And who are some of the other like characters that she's interacting with in the book?
Definitely people at the New York Times. Like she has an assistant. She has some other editors. The man who at the time is the chairman of the Times and has to work with advertisers. I mean, as writers know, it's a constant balance of can we make this work financially and still tell our stories and be independent. And then there are times when things have to be branded content. You have to work with advertisers. I do a lot of marketing copy for things like wines and spirits. And so she comes to a point where the chairman's kind of saying, you gave a really bad review to the steakhouse. He's like a partner. We're going to lose money. And she kind of had to just say, well, that's what it's going to have to be, which is so interesting to read because I feel like now I don't know if that would happen. They just have to like slap a branded content thing on it and say,
okay,
I do feel like it's nice to read the old ways of journalism.
Yeah. What affected those changes? Like, is it because we're so online now or there's so many connections? I don't know.
I think it's tough because the thing is, if a restaurant gets a bad review or something, they can go pay a TikToker to lie and say whatever they want and have it go super viral. And there's no fact checker on that, right? There's no... So they just feel like, and that's the same, right? If the restaurant paid a TikToker to come, they typically don't disclose it as they should. But now journalists or writers will disclose, okay, this is sponsored by this restaurant. So obviously you're taking a slightly different angle and this is still what things taste like and what things are. But I do think it's just, when you're reading this, there's two newspapers in the whole city, basically. It's the New York Post, the New York Times. Yeah. And that's so different now. You can go to 100 websites to see a review of a restaurant. You can find the recipes from all over the place, So I think it's rather than the advertisers being forced to come to people, now the advertisers want a little more sway over their content. I mean, I do a lot of like content on sponsored posts and things on Instagram, and it's always a balance. Like I always have in the contract that like I get final editorial say, but obviously like there's certain things you just can't say when it's with the brand. Not that I would ever, work with someone who I didn't think was a good product, but it's just
right. Yeah. Well, and like, I guess that's a question for you is like, what advice would you give to someone who's coming up in the field, maybe yourself 10 years ago?
Wow. Such a good question. I never thought of this. I actually went to journalism school and so much of what I learned, unfortunately, is not relevant. Like we were still editing video on like giant computers with like actual tapes and things. And like, I think I would tell people to be nimble and not ignore new platforms. I think like people who are like rolling their eyes at TikTok, or like in the book, actually, she talks about rolling her eyes about the website and they brought in a web editor. And it's like, yeah, that's what ended up taking over. She went to Sephora that then closed down, yeah, you can't roll your eyes at the TikToks of the world, even if there's things you don't agree with, at least being aware of it and knowing what people are looking for. And then the other one is be original. I think coming up in journalism now, it's so easy to accidentally get in a clickbait mill where they're like, write this listicle for me, do this. But you can still do those things with a voice. And when you have a voice, you'll end up building an audience or getting attention. So I think even if you have a really boring assignment, if you can be original and think about all the platforms out there that it's relevant to, that's the way to grow right now. I don't know if journalism, what do you think? Do you think journalism will be around in like
I hope so.
10 years?
I hope so. I mean, we need it. We definitely need it. And it's so important to have people who are still being honest with us on the truth, I guess, their experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, I mean, a lot of my research is digging into things that are just about being human and the science of our senses and not so monetizable, I guess. But you need, those are things that just go unnoticed or unreported or undiscovered if no one's talking about them. So
yeah,
I always hope there's ways that journalists can follow their interests and share them with people.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, definitely. I love that. Let's see. Going to the book real quick, I did want to ask you, who would you recommend Garlic and Sapphires to?
I think, good question. I think budding journalists, totally. But also anyone who's curious about New York or into New York or wants to know about New York history. I think it's always recommended to foodies and everyone's like, oh, Ruth, she's, an iconic voice. But I think it's really underrated for the New York history there. She talks about the waves, how steakhouses came in a huge wave and there was all these steakhouses opening. She was one of the first people to ever put any kind of sushi, not just review, but put sushi in the New York Times. It was like when sushi was on the rise in New York. Now every reservation that's open at night is an omakase restaurant. So I think it really is like a nice time capsule of what it was actually like to live and eat in this city. And people who are curious about New York, I think, there is that kind of Sex in the City coming back around. I guess people are watching it on Netflix and stuff. And so I think it's a really nice time capsule of that as well. Obviously, people who love food know her writing and that's a good recommendation. But I think it's a sneaker for people who are into New York or into like just American history, recent American history.
Okay, excellent. I love that. That was perfect. Perfect.
Yay.
I want to take some time now to talk about like your work and what you've got coming up, fun stuff like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wrote a book, How to Taste.
Yes.
A guide to discovering flavor and savoring life. It's a nonfiction book about both the science of our senses and kind of how you can incorporate taste into your life to live a better life. A lot of the quotes that I see are about like, I have a chapter on tasting in travel or tasting in memories. And so it's really cool to see that kind of more soft science or that kind of stuff travel far. And it was inspired definitely by Ruth. There's a book called Cork Dork that it really inspired it as well.
Okay.
I think those where their narrative, it's coming from my point of view. I like talk about all the crazy olive oil somms and mustard sommeliers and water tasters and chocolate judges that I talk to. And I try to make it like there's a lot of fun characters. It's not just like a textbook by any means. So I think that's, if anyone's curious about tasting and wants to hear about all the quirky people, it's amazing to me how many different kinds of certified tasters are out there. And basically everything in your life, from like your scented candles to the crackers in your pantry to like the wines on the table, like a certified taster has been around that at some point.
Wow.
Which I didn't realize how prevalent it was until I really started digging into the industry.
Yeah. And so is it talking about like all of the different ways to taste or the history of it and all of those factors as well?
There's not a ton of history in it. That's such a great maybe book too. I would love to like the rise of the professional taster.
Yeah.
But the first third of the book is really about the science of our senses. So like the fact that 20% of our genes as humans are actually dedicated to decoding scent. Okay. So all of us live in these different scent worlds because we all have like, you might have the scent or the gene for smelling onions really, really strong. And I only have one. So we smell totally differently. There's really interesting stuff about that. And then just how tasting actually works, how you can improve it, the tasting method. The whole second section is about the 7-step tasting method, which I worked with 116 experts to make one thing that you can use for olive oil, for honey, for chocolate, for whatever you want to taste. Winter melons, someone said they used it on. So that's the second section. And then the third one, like I said, is a little more fun about taste in your health, taste in travel, taste in memory, how to kind of use these little tips and tricks that these professionals know to kind of make your life more exciting, more colorful. There's little tips about how to use scent for memory, things like using different perfumes on vacations or after a big breakup or before a big test. So just little ways that you can kind of tweak your sensory world to live a more fun, exciting life. So those are kind of the 3 sections.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to check it out. I have to tell you. So I had my daughter about 10 years ago. And I feel like ever since I was pregnant, you know, they say you get pregnant and you get a really strong sense of smell. Like mine never went away.
Wow, that's so interesting. You know, but like your
It's
genes
good
can
and
kind of
bad.
shift. Yeah, your genes can kind of shift a little bit with pregnancy, right? Because they say like the DNA of the baby affects yours as well.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Is there any sense that you feel super sensitive to now, or like you notice?
It's nothing. I can just smell things. Like I work in a library. And so like
Amazing.
I'll come out and I'll be like, what is that? And everyone's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, something is going on and I have to go find it. So it's just like very strong.
That's so interesting. So our sense of smell is like, it was originally to protect us, right? Like the reason we could smell was like to smell fire or like smell a predator. That's like one of the strongest smells to humans is sweat, because that's like, we used to smell the sweat of our predators. Like, we got it. So you just are still on like mama mode where you have the nose to like keep everyone safe. You can smell the dangers coming. That's amazing.
I think so. I definitely think so too.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask before we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to discuss or with the book or anything that we missed that you wanted to hit on?
I definitely want to say thank you for being a librarian. It was amazing to go on book tour, and just the communities that are built in libraries. I think people don't realize just how much of a community center they really are. You know, I'm obviously in New York City, our libraries have these crazy events and things, but like going to small libraries, being a provider of knowledge to people, I think is just so underrated, and our society would be in big trouble without libraries and librarians. You can't have a robot as a librarian, despite what AI wants us to think.
No, thank you. That's very, I really very much appreciate that. So thank you so much. This has truly been a pleasure. I'm so interested in learning more about scents and smell and taste and all of this. So thank you.
Yeah, and I guess if anyone has questions or wants to learn about tasting their drinks with Mandy on Instagram, and you can find, I have like a website and everything too, but if you type in drinks with Mandy, it'll all pop up.
Perfect.
I love answering questions on Instagram. That's like my,
Okay, good to know. Good to know. And I'm going to put everything in the show notes so they can just, if you're listening to this right now, you've got lots of things to click. So.
Oh, should I send you a Cosmo recipe?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect.
I'll put it on there and I'll put, this is Mandy's Cosmo.
Slightly tweaked, yeah.
All right.
Thank you for spending some time with me and my guest for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.